Yeah, one of my favorite, most profound quotes I've ever heard came from Einstein when he was asked about World War III. I'm sure you're familiar with it. He said, whoever asked him, they said, what are your thoughts or what weapons do you think World War III will be fought with? And he said, I know not what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones, which I think is one of the most profound, powerful quotes I've ever heard. But
He has a lot of great quotes, but I should mention one thing. How much do you know about the Einstein letter? Because that was often.
a little bit,
No,
not
no. See,
much.
this is one thing that I mentioned actually in my article that's coming out, and some others have pointed this. There is a mythology that grew up about that letter that still is very influential in thinking about Einstein's legacy, because to a lot of people, and this is true of millions and millions of people, and also in a lot of superficial, junior high school textbooks and things like that, they recount how in August 1939, Einstein signed a letter to Franklin Roosevelt that had actually been drafted by three Hungarian physicists who had gone to the United States to warn Roosevelt that an atomic bomb built from uranium might be possible, and Germany might already be working on it. And if they captured Belgium, they might gain access to the uranium in the Belgian Congo, which was the best quality uranium, and essentially warning Roosevelt, you got to do something. And this letter was passed to Roosevelt by an intermediary on October 11th, 1939, a month and 10 days after the war had actually started. And Roosevelt famously said, Pa, that was his aide, this needs action. And in much of the popular mythology, that's the beginning of the Manhattan Project. That leads to the atomic bomb. The reality was that, yes, Roosevelt said, this needs action. He appointed a committee, but for 2 years, that committee did virtually nothing. And in fact, in 1940-41, the most intense work that led to the calculations that an atomic bomb might be possible, and that therefore Germany might be able to build one, were done in Britain. And American physicists who were worried about this got increasingly frustrated because they were afraid the US was falling behind. And so only in the summer, autumn of 1941 did the British pass these calculations to the US government. And actually it got to the guy I wrote my undergraduate thesis on, the guy who was president of Harvard. That led to him making the recommendation, along with Vannevar Bush, who was related to the famous Bush political family, and Prescott Bush, who was then the senator from Connecticut, and of course generations later to George H.W. To urge Roosevelt that, wait a minute, we got to get more serious about whether or not this bomb could be built. And that led to the decision in October 1941 to have a much more serious effort to investigate whether the bomb could be built. It eliminated the committee that did nothing that Roosevelt had created, and that led to the recommendation which Roosevelt approved in June 1942 for an all-out crash program to build the atomic bomb, which led 4 months later, in September 1942, to bringing the Army in and General Leslie Groves in, and only then did Groves call it the Manhattan Project. The irony is that the same month, June 42, that Roosevelt approved a crash program to build the bomb, that's when the Nazis decided not to approve a crash program to build the atomic bomb. That's when Heisenberg had a meeting with some other scientific military leaders with Albert Speer, Hitler's chief of armaments.
Yeah, yeah.
And when Speer said, I only want to approve massive projects for things that can influence the war before it ends, he predicted the war would be over in a year or two.
Yeah.
And Heisenberg later said, well, I couldn't promise to build an atomic bomb in just a year or two, so I didn't even ask for much money. And so you have this irony that for the rest of the war, the Americans were chasing a ghost. There was no serious German project. But on the other hand, the decision also involved the calculation that if this bomb can exist, the United States needed to have it, because Pearl Harbor had essentially made clear that isolationism was gone. And for the future, whether or not Germany is trying to get it, the U.S. is going to need it. And so that's why it's a famous story. When Germany surrendered, and when it was made clear that in very late 1944 that it had not come close to building an atomic bomb, the order from Washington to Los Alamos and to the other parts of the Manhattan Project was not, okay, you can relax now. The pressure to finish the bomb intensified. And of all the hundreds of physicists at Los Alamos, only one left in early 1945, because he said, I came here because of the fear of Germany getting the bomb. If Germany's not going to get the bomb, I don't want to be part of this. And that was Joseph Rotblat, who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize more than 40 years later, because he became an anti-nuclear activist. This remind me, what were you asking about again?
We were just going off that Einstein quote.
Oh yeah. Of
war.
course, this is of course what produces, the bombs that are used on Japan. Einstein was not involved at all in the scientific process to actually work on the bomb. He never went to Los Alamos during the project. And in fact, I remember I found this when I was working on my undergraduate thesis. I was so amazed. The Manhattan Project security people circulated memos that Einstein was a dangerous alien who had been born in Germany in the Axis. And, he wasn't even safe to bring him aboard. But because Einstein was a skeptic about quantum mechanics, he was not needed for any calculations. And also, when the bomb was used, Einstein strongly opposed the use of the bomb. And he even expressed regret for his limited role in signing that letter. And so Einstein died 10 years later in 1955, but, he had to struggle against every time there would be a statement appearing somewhere that Einstein gave us the bomb, and he would be frantically saying, no, I didn't. And it was really true that, the bomb was developed, but it was not directly inspired by Einstein's letter. And that mythology has been almost impossible to get rid of ever since.
Yeah, I think the Oppenheimer movie did a great job at portraying Einstein's role in the Manhattan Project, because obviously, like you said, he wasn't directly involved, but Oppenheimer would go to him for some advice or some counsel. And there was a line, I believe it was at the very beginning of the movie. I don't remember the exact line, but Louis Strauss and Oppenheimer were talking about Einstein, and Oppenheimer said, he was a scientist of the past or something like that. He like you said, he didn't buy into the new age physics of quantum mechanics and stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting. The movie makers invented some of the dialogue between Oppenheimer and Einstein, and also in a couple of cases attributed to Oppenheimer-Einstein conversations that actually took place between Einstein and someone else, simply because that would have been dramatically too complicated. But the line at the end of the movie about thinking the first explosion might cause the end of the world, and them saying, well, it did.
He says, I believe
that was invented, but it symbolized things that they certainly thought. So I thought that was brilliantly done. You could read my essay on the Oppenheimer movie if you're interested.
Oh man, yeah, I thought Oppenheimer had one of the greatest movie endings in history. Just the way Cillian Murphy delivered that last line where he says, "I believe we have," and they're looking out over the raindrops, over the pond to symbolize, all the nuclear strikes. It was just so chilling. You know what I mean?
Yeah. By the way, you'll see the ending of Dr. Strangelove is quite striking also. But also the way the ending counters what Strauss had believed, that Oppenheimer was just cold to him and had ignored and hadn't understood the dilemmas. And actually, I wrote about that in my book about, it's interesting, Conant, the president of Harvard, who I wrote the fat book about, he was a good friend of Oppenheimer. And he was also an enemy of Strauss. And so Conan supported Oppenheimer, and I write all about that. And the
Man.
Conan-Oppenheimer-Strauss relationship is something I write a lot about.
Yeah. I saw Oppenheimer twice in theaters, and now I want to rewatch it again. It was so good.
I dragged my kids to see Oppenheimer, and I also agreed to see Barbie with them at the same time.
Oh,
so
man.
I got to see them both. But now you have to see Strangelove and Failsafe.
No, I will be watching Strangelove tonight. But
And I'll give you one other recommendation. Okay. I told you I've been teaching at George Washington University since 1997, and I teach the history of the nuclear arms race every year. And for more than 25 years, I start the class every single year the same way, and it's with a brilliant documentary about Oppenheimer and the bomb that came out in 1980, and which I saw in a class as an undergraduate in 1981, which first got me interested in the Oppenheimer atomic story.
yeah.
And it perfectly complements, if you see it before the movie Oppenheimer or after the movie Oppenheimer. But it has conversations with the real people, not actors. And it's a brilliant documentary. And so I'm going to give you the name of this, and you could look it up on YouTube and watch it for free. And it's half the length of the movie Oppenheimer, which of course was way too short for my satisfaction. But the documentary you need to see, I mean, I've seen it like more than 25 times, and it's still fascinating every time.
Wow.
It's called The Day After Trinity.
All right. Gotcha.
And it's produced by a guy named John Else. The first name is Jon, no H, and the last name is Else, E-L-S-E. But if you just go to YouTube and type The Day After Trinity, you'll go to a link where it's for free, and you could watch it there. And I guarantee you will find it absolutely fascinating, and it will help your assessment of the movie Oppenheimer. In fact, I forced my class to watch this documentary, but I didn't have time to make them watch the movie Oppenheimer in class, so I told them all that if you watch the movie Oppenheimer and write your personal reaction, not from AI or downloaded from the web, you can get extra credit for the class by doing that. And I think I'll do that next year too.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a huge film nerd, so I saw the very first IMAX screening of Oppenheimer. It was a packed theater. It was a packed theater. The energy was there. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And just when that bomb went off and the way they shot it, just like the whole suspense and the way you see the flash and it's silent. I wasn't expecting that, and then it just like blows you away. It was incredible.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time doing this, but now you made it, so I have to show you. Okay, have you ever used FOIA?
No.
Do you know what FOIA is? I'm making you one of the cognoscenti. FOIA is FOIA,
right? Yeah.
The Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, okay, I do know FOIA, yeah.
Now, anyone can file a FOIA request. Okay, I have to tell you the story. Okay. When I was an undergraduate in 1982, I was in Boston writing this undergraduate thesis about Conan and the atomic bomb. And the highlight of the story came when Conan, the president of Harvard, he was a key science advisor in Washington. He was General Grove's science advisor. And this guy, Conan, he attended the Trinity Test on July 16th. However, something that drove me crazy was he never wrote about it. He had published in 1971 a 700-page memoir, My Several Lives, but he didn't even mention his attendance at the Trinity Test. He had died in 1978, so he died 4 years before I wrote the thesis. But I knew he was there. And I was in this frustrating situation of having to describe it in my thesis on the basis of third-hand accounts of, Conan was shaken up, or I shook Conan's hand, or things like that. It was very frustrating. Then something amazing happened. Every weekend, I would take, or every couple of weeks, I would take the train from Boston, 8 hours to Washington, to Union Station, and then walk to the National Archives, which hadn't moved to Maryland and didn't move to College Park, Maryland until 1994, to do my research on the atomic bomb project. Now, that, of course, was all the declassified documents in the files about the Manhattan Project, right?
Right.
However, before a document is declassified, and this has to do with CIA documents or foreign policy documents or military documents, it has to be reviewed to approve it for declassification.
Mm-hmm.
And under a rule, there needs to be a single-page form space saver saying that a document had been removed for security reasons from this location. And on that sheet, it had the author of the document, the title of the document, the date of the document, as well as there was a series of boxes about why the document had been kept classified. And as I'm frantically going through these files, I find a sheet that says J.B. Conant, Notes on the Trinity Test, 17 July 1945. Obviously written the day after. And oh my God, I freak out. And the thing is, normally to file a Freedom of Information Act request, you're lucky if you get a response in years. Sometimes it's decades. I mean, literally now, they say it takes 10 years before documents that are appealed are even looked at or things like that. And my thesis was due in like 2 months. And Harvard had an absolutely ironclad deadline that, if your thesis isn't done and you're 10 minutes late, don't bother, you flunk. So I write a message of pleading to the head of declassification of the Archives military branch, explaining the situation and explaining I don't care about any technical information. I just want to know what Conant was feeling or thinking.
Yeah.
And this is the days before email and before email attachments and things like that. But one day in my dorm, I get a manila envelope, and there in manila envelope is the declassified notes that Conant took about the Trinity Test, 8 handwritten pages, including his own sketches of the world's first nuclear mushroom clouds.
Wow.
But the most amazing thing is the following. Here. I published the whole thing in my book. Can you see the mushroom cloud sketches?
Yeah.
Okay. When they first started the Manhattan Project, actually in the summer of 1942, a couple of the physicists like Edward Teller and Enrico Fermi, those names sound familiar?
Yes.
Worried that what if the first nuclear explosion causes a chain reaction in the atmosphere and destroys all life on Earth? Maybe that wouldn't be a good idea.
Right.
And so they had a frantic 3-week summer study out in California at Berkeley. And they calculated, don't worry. One version I saw is it was only a 3 in 10 million chance that the nitrogen atoms would be lined up in a particular way. So they figured, okay, it's safe to go ahead. Now, you might remember from the movie Oppenheimer that the night of the Trinity Test, the night of July 15th, 16th, 1945, when the scientists were under intense pressure to test because the Potsdam Conference was about to open in Germany, and Truman wanted to know before he met Stalin whether the atomic bomb worked or not.
Right.
So there was intense pressure to finish it. That it was raining, there were thunderstorms, there was lightning, and it was delayed. And Enrico Fermi, the Italian Nobel laureate physicist who had escaped Mussolini because of anti-Semitic laws that would affect his wife, who was Jewish.
Yeah.
He had escaped to Colombia to New York in late 1938. He was making jokes about whether the first atomic explosion would destroy the whole world,
Yeah,
or just the state of New Mexico.
bets. Yeah, they were waging bets.
Yes, exactly. Well, I will read to you Conant's reaction when the atomic bomb went off. And the important thing to remember, let me get the picture, is the following. Okay. Do you see these photographs?
Yeah. Yeah, I can
This
see
is
him.
Conant and Bush supposedly lying on the desert looking through their little piece of dark glass at the Trinity Test, right?
Wow.
Now,
Yeah.
in reality, that was an arts imitating life. That was actually reenacted for a March of Time documentary in March 1946 at a warehouse in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But the important thing is, it seems that Conant was looking through the dark glass at the explosion, right?
Uh-huh.
However, and this is actually something that the movie Oppenheimer gets wrong,
Really?
because the maker didn't read my book. Conant was lying on the ground, looking at the opposite direction of ground zero. And the sky was still dark because it was 5:29 in the morning, right?
Right.
And since he was looking in the opposite direction from the explosion, he didn't think he needed his glass to look through, right? He was
Right.
just looking with his bare eyes.
Yeah.
So let me describe what was in his report, what the day after, what he said, and something he never wrote about in his whole life, but I had just discovered. He wrote, okay, at 5:20, the sirens blew the 10-minute signal, then another at 5:25, and I think another 2 minutes before. We lay belly down facing 180 degrees away from the spot on a tarpaulin. I kept my eyes open, looking at the horizon opposite the spot. It was beginning to be light, but the general sky was still dark, particularly in the general direction I was looking. Through the loudspeaker nearby, I heard Allison counting the seconds, -45, -40, -30, -20, -10. The firing was done by some kind of timing device, started at -45 seconds. These were long seconds. Then came a burst of white light that seemed to fill the sky and seemed to last for seconds. I had expected a relatively quick and bright flash. The enormity of the light and its length quite stunned me. My instantaneous reaction was that something had gone wrong, and that the thermal nuclear transformation of the atmosphere,